She ran into the wrong room, and the Alpha King's mother smiled. My son needs a mate. I grabbed the wrong door handle and stumbled into a room that wasn't mine. Soaked in rain, barefoot, and one breath away from being sold to a man 3 times my age. The woman sitting in the shadows didn't scream. She smiled. Then she said 5 words that changed everything. My son needs a mate. I should have run, but before I could move, she saw it. My hands glowing in the dark, healing a scar she'd carried for 60 years without even meaning to. Now I'm trapped in a castle with a dying king who hates hope, a court full of people who want him dead, and a stepfather who just arrived at the gates pretending to be a merchant. What he doesn't know is that the king I'm supposed to heal. He just woke up, grabbed my wrist, and for the first time in 3 years, the poison stopped hurting him. The kitchen of the Red Clay Motel smelled like burnt fat and desperation. Smoke curled up from the iron stove where yesterday's stew had been left too long, mixing with the sour scent of cheap ale that seemed to live in the wooden walls themselves. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall on the dusty road that connected the forgotten village of Marrow's End to the rest of the world. A world that had long stopped caring about this place. Kira knelt in the corner by the back door, her knees pressed against the cold stone floor, her hands cupped around something precious. In her palms, a small bird lay dying. She had found it in the gutter outside, one wing bent at an angle that made her stomach twist. Its tiny chest rose and fell in desperate, stuttering beats. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her hands began to glow anyway, soft and golden, like candlelight seen through honey. The warmth spread from her fingertips into the bird's broken body. She felt the pull, that strange emptiness that always came when she used her gift, as if something inside her was being poured out into another vessel. The bird's wings straightened. Its breathing steadied. In moments, it fluttered free from her hands and disappeared into the rain. Kira slumped against the wall, exhausted, and pulled her oversized wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 19, she had learned to hide many things. Her gift, her thoughts, her dreams. She had learned that beauty, even the unrefined kind she possessed with her dark tangled hair and amber eyes, was a curse when you had no one to protect you. She had learned that in Nalif's house, she was not a daughter. She was inventory. Kira. The voice boomed from the hallway, followed by the heavy footsteps she had come to dread. Nalif, her stepfather, a man whose belly had grown as large as his greed and whose eyes had gone cold the day her mother died. Get yourself cleaned up. We have important guests tonight. She rose slowly, her heart beginning to hammer. Important guests meant travelers with money. And travelers with money meant Nalif would smile his oil-slick smile and start calculating what he could extract from them. Kira moved into the narrow hallway, staying close to the shadows. The motel was a sagging, 2-story structure built decades ago when Marrow's End had been a proper stopover for traders heading north to the Iron Territories. Now it housed mostly drifters, gamblers, and men running from something. 12 rooms. Thin walls. And tonight, because of the storm rolling in, every room was occupied. She passed the main room where a few travelers sat hunched over cards and drinks. The fire in the hearth sputtered weakly. No one looked up. She had perfected the art of being invisible here too. Then she heard it. Voices. Low and sharp, coming from the corridor that led to the guest rooms. She's a rare prize, Gofa. Young. Untouched. Clean. Nalif's voice, thick with the promise of coins. Kira froze. You said 50 gold pieces. For one night. That's the bargain. The second voice belonged to Gofa, a traveling merchant she had seen in the main room earlier. He was a thick-necked man with fingers like sausages and a smile that never reached his eyes. 50 gold, and you do what you like with her till dawn, Nalif confirmed. Just don't mark her face. I might use her again. The words hit her like a fist to the chest. She stepped backward, her breath catching, her mind racing. He was selling her. Not in marriage. Not even in service. Just selling her. For one night. Like a lamb at the market. Terror gripped her throat. She turned and ran. The hallway blurred. Her bare feet slapped against the warped floorboards. She heard Nalif shout behind her, and heard his heavy boots start to move. She didn't think so. She just ran, heart pounding, vision narrowing, hands reaching for any door, any escape. Her fingers found a handle. She twisted it, shoved it open, and stumbled inside. The room was warm. Soft. It smelled like lavender and something else, something expensive. Kira fell forward onto a plush rug, her knees hitting the floor hard, her breath coming in ragged gasps. And then she looked up. Sitting in a high-backed chair near the window, wrapped in a traveling cloak of deep blue, was a woman. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair braided elegantly around her head and eyes that gleamed like polished stone. Her posture was regal. Her presence filled the room like a flame fills a lantern. The woman did not startle. She did not scream. She simply looked at Kira with the calm, assessing gaze of someone who had seen much in her life and was rarely surprised. "Well," the woman said softly, a smile beginning to curve her lips. "This is unexpected." Kira tried to speak, but no words came. She was shaking, her hands still faintly glowing from the panic coursing through her veins. She realized, with horror, that the woman could see it. The light. The gift. The woman leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Not in suspicion, but in something closer to wonder. "What is your name, child?" Kira, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Kira," the woman repeated, as if tasting the name. "And why are you running?" Before Kira could answer, the door burst open. Nalef filled the doorway, his face red, his breath heavy. But when he saw who sat in the chair, he stopped. His bluster died in his throat. "Your Grace," he stammered, his voice suddenly small. "Forgive the intrusion. The girl, she's confused. I'll remove her at once." "No," the woman said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You will not." She rose from her chair, and despite her age, there was a power in her movements that made even Nalef take a step back. "This girl," the woman said, her gaze never leaving Kira, "belongs to me now." Nalef's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Your Grace, I don't understand." "You don't need to." The woman reached into her cloak and produced a small leather purse. She tossed it to Nalef. It landed at his feet with a heavy clink. "That is triple what any merchant would pay you. Take it. And if you ever seek her out again, if you ever speak her name in anything but reverence, the king's shadow will be the last thing you see." Nalef bent, scooped up the purse, and retreated without another word. The door closed. Silence filled the room. Kira stared up at the woman, her mind spinning. Who are you?" The woman smiled, and it was not unkind, but there was something ancient and knowing in it. "My name is Nima," she said quietly. "And you, my dear, are going to save my son." Kira's breath caught. "I don't understand." Nima knelt slowly, her eyes level with Kira's. She reached out and touched Kira's trembling hand. The glow had faded, but Nima had seen it. She knew. "My son is dying," Nima whispered. "Not from battle, not from the blade, but from something deeper, something that rots from the inside. I have searched for years for someone who could heal him. And tonight you ran into my room." She cupped Kira's face gently, her smile growing. "My son needs a mate, and I think the gods just delivered one." But what Kira didn't know was that the Alpha King had sworn never to let another woman near his heart. And in 3 days she would stand before him in chains, accused of witchcraft, with only Nima's word standing between her and the executioner's blade. "Would you let someone save you if you believed you deserved to die? I want you to do 2 things now. First, subscribe, and secondly, tell me where you are watching from. Now you are part of this journey, thank you." Kira had never been inside a carriage before. She sat stiff as a board on the velvet bench, her hands folded in her lap, afraid to touch anything. The interior was lined with deep burgundy fabric, soft as lamb's wool, and the windows had real glass, not the oiled parchment she was used to. Outside, the world rolled by in shades of green and gray as they left Marrow's End behind. Across from her, Nima sat with her eyes closed, her breathing slow and even. She looked peaceful, but Kira knew better. This woman was always watching, always thinking, even when she appeared to rest. The carriage hit a rut in the road, and Kira grabbed the edge of the seat to steady herself. Her stomach lurched. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Nalef never fed her before guests arrived, said it made her too comfortable. And the swaying motion wasn't helping. "You should eat something," Nima said without opening her eyes. Kira jumped slightly. "I'm fine. You're pale as milk and shaking." Nima's eyes opened, sharp and knowing. She reached into a small basket at her feet and withdrew a cloth bundle. "Bread and cheese. Nothing fancy, but it'll settle your stomach." Kira hesitated, then took the bundle. The bread was still warm, soft and white, the kind she'd only ever seen carried past her to wealthy guests. She tore off a small piece and ate it slowly, and the taste was so good it almost made her want to cry. "Where are we going exactly?" Kira asked quietly. "North." To the Iron Throne, my son's seat of power. Nima leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window. It sits at the edge of the Blackwater Forest, where the old kingdoms used to war over land and bloodlines. Kian united them all 15 years ago. Some call him a conqueror. Others call him a savior. Both are true, I suppose. Kira chewed slowly, her mind struggling to picture herself in a place like that. And he's dying? Yes. The word hung in the air like smoke. Nima's face didn't change, but Kira saw the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the edge of her cloak just a little too hard. It happened 3 years ago, Nima continued, her voice measured, as if she'd told this story many times but still hadn't found a way to make it hurt less. A border skirmish with rebels from the southern clans. They used poisoned blades, crude things dipped in something we still can't identify. Kian took a wound to his side. Small. Almost nothing. But it didn't heal, Kira said softly. No, it didn't. Nima's jaw tightened. The flesh closed over, but the poison stayed inside. It's rotting him from within. Black veins spread from the wound, slow but relentless. Some days he can barely stand. Other days he hides it well enough to sit on his throne and pass judgment like nothing's wrong. She looked at Kira then, and her eyes were fierce. But he's breaking, and he knows it. Kira set the bread down, her appetite gone. You said no physician could name the poison. What makes you think I can heal it? Because you're not a physician. Nima leaned forward, her gaze intense. Physicians treat symptoms. They cut and stitch and dose with herbs. But you, child, you heal the essence of a person. You put back what's been taken. I saw it in your hands the moment you touched me. Kira blinked. I didn't. You did. Nima pushed up the sleeve of her gown, revealing her forearm. There, just below her wrist, was smooth, unblemished skin. I had a scar here. A burn from childhood, 60 years old. When you stumbled into my room and grabbed my arm to steady yourself, it vanished. You didn't even notice. Kira stared at the spot, her heart pounding. She didn't remember. She'd been so terrified, so desperate to escape Nalif, that she hadn't even registered what her hands were doing. That's why I knew, Nima said quietly. That's why I paid 300 gold pieces without blinking. Because you are what the old songs call a heart healer. And my son needs you. Kira shook her head, panic rising in her chest. But I don't know how to control it. I don't even understand it. My mother never taught me. She died before she could. What if I make it worse? What if you save him? Nima interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. What if you're the answer I've been praying for? I'm nobody, Kira whispered. I'm just a girl from a falling-apart motel who's good for nothing but scrubbing floors and keeping her mouth shut. Nima reached across the carriage and took Kira's hands in hers. Her grip was warm, strong, and steady. Listen to me. Nalif told you that you were nothing because it made you easier to control. But you are not nothing. You are a girl with a gift so rare that kings would go to war to possess it. And yes, you're terrified. Yes, you don't know what you're doing. But you're here. And that's enough for now. Kira's throat tightened. She wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that she could be more than what she'd been told all her life. But belief was a fragile thing, and hers had been shattered too many times. The carriage rolled on. Hours passed. The landscape outside shifted from flat farmland to rolling hills, and then to dense stretches of forest. The trees here were old, thick-trunked and towering, their branches twisting together overhead like clasped hands. The Blackwater Forest, Nima said, noticing Kira's gaze. We're close now. Kira's pulse quickened. What? What is he like? Your son. Nima was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Kira had ever heard it. He's hard. He's been a king since he was 17, and the crown doesn't forgive softness. He's seen too much death, made too many decisions that haunt him. She paused. But he's also loyal. Once he gives you his trust, he'll burn the world down before he lets you come to harm. He's just forgotten how to let anyone close enough to earn it. And you think he'll trust me? Kira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nima smiled, sad and knowing. No, I think he'll fight you every step of the way. But I also think you're stubborn enough not to give up on him. The carriage began to slow. Kira looked out the window and saw it, rising out of the forest like a beast of stone and iron, its towers dark against the pale sky. The Iron Throne, her new prison, or her new home. She didn't know which yet. As the gates groaned open and the carriage rolled inside, Nima leaned close and whispered, Remember Kira? You are not here to serve him. You are here to save him. There's a difference. The carriage came to a stop. Nima stepped out first, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. Kira followed, her legs shaking, her heart hammering in her chest. And then she saw him, standing at the top of the stone steps, flanked by guards in black armor, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from iron himself. Tall, broad-shouldered. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, and his eyes, dark as coal, fixed on her with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Kian, the Alpha King. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stared at her like she was the last thing in the world he wanted to see. But what Kira didn't know was that the king had already decided she would fail. And when she did, he'd send her back to the village she came from, if she was lucky. Would his mother's faith be enough to save them both? Or was this journey just another mistake in a long line of broken hopes? The courtyard of the Iron Throne was nothing like Kira had imagined. She'd expected grandeur, maybe gold-trimmed gates or marble fountains like the ones in the stories her mother used to tell. Instead, she found herself standing on dark cobblestones worn smooth by decades of boots and hooves. The walls were high and black, built from stone that looked like it had been pulled from the belly of a mountain. Torches burned in iron brackets even though it was midday, their flames casting restless shadows across the faces of the guards who lined the steps. And at the top of those steps stood Kian. Kira's breath caught in her throat. He was massive, easily a head taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight his title demanded. He wore black leather and chainmail, practical and battle-worn, not the silk and velvet she'd expected of a king. His hair was dark, cut short, and a scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a pale line that looked like it had been drawn by a blade that wanted to kill him but settled for marking him instead. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. Dark, cold, empty of anything resembling warmth or welcome. He looked at her the way a butcher might look at a piece of meat he was deciding whether to keep or toss to the dogs. Nima ascended the steps with grace, her chin high, and kissed her son's cheek. She whispered something Kira couldn't hear, her hand resting briefly on his arm. Kian's jaw tightened. His gaze never left Kira. When Nima stepped aside, he descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, like a wolf circling prey. He stopped 3 paces away from her, close enough that Kira had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could smell him, iron and leather, sweat and something darker. Old blood, maybe. Or the rot Nima had spoken of. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. His eyes lingered on her oversized wool shawl, her bare feet stained with road dust, her tangled hair that she hadn't had time to braid properly. Then he spoke, and his voice was like gravel scraped across stone. "My mother sends me a child to do a queen's work?" The words hit her like a slap. Kira opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her mind went blank. All the fear she'd been holding back since the carriage ride came flooding in at once, drowning her. "She's 19, Kian," Nima said sharply from behind him. "Older than I was when I married your father. She looks 12. Kian's lip curled. "And she smells like a stable." Heat flooded Kira's face. Shame twisted in her gut, sharp and familiar. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run back to the carriage, back to Marrow's End, back to anywhere but here under this man's cold, cutting stare. But her feet wouldn't move. "Speak, girl," Kian said, his tone almost bored. "Or are you mute as well as useless?" Something inside Kira snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fear finally reaching its limit. Or maybe it was the fact that she'd spent 19 years being spoken to like she was nothing, and some small, stubborn part of her was done bending. "My name is Kira," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Not girl. Not child. Kira." Kian's eyes narrowed. For a moment, the courtyard went so quiet she could hear the torches crackling. Then, to her surprise, one corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not even close. But something that might have been the ghost of one, a long time ago. "Kira," he repeated slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do here, Kira?" She faltered. "Your mother said you needed help. That you were sick." His expression darkened instantly. The almost smile vanished. "Sick," he said flatly. "Poisoned," Nima corrected, stepping forward. "Don't twist her words, Kian. You know what I brought her here for." Kian turned to his mother, and the look he gave her was colder than anything he'd directed at Kira. "You brought her here because you're desperate. because you refuse to accept that some things can't be fixed. You're not a thing, Nima said, her voice low and fierce. You're my son, and I will not watch you rot away when there's still hope. Hope, Kian laughed, bitter and hollow. You've brought me hope before, mother. 3 times, if I'm counting right. 3 healers. 3 failures. He looked back at Kira, and his eyes were empty. What makes you think this one will be any different? Kira's heart sank. 3 healers. 3 failures. She hadn't known. Nima hadn't told her. She's different, Nima insisted. I saw her gift myself. She's a heart healer, Kian. The kind the old songs speak of. Kian stared at Kira for a long, unbearable moment. Then he turned and started back up the steps. Put her in the east wing, he said over his shoulder, his tone dismissive. Give her a bath. Burn those rags. If she's going to waste my time, she can at least look presentable doing it. Kian, I'm done, mother. He stopped at the top of the steps and looked back one last time. His gaze landed on Kira, and there was nothing in it but exhaustion. If you want to play healer, girl, then play. But don't expect me to pretend I believe in miracles anymore. He turned and disappeared through the heavy oak doors. Kira stood in the courtyard, her hands clenched at her sides, her whole body trembling. The guards didn't look at her. The servants who'd gathered to watch melted back into the shadows. She was alone again, just like always. Nima descended the steps and placed a hand on Kira's shoulder. Her grip was firm, grounding. Don't let him break you, she said quietly. He's afraid. Men like him don't know how to ask for help, so they push it away instead. He hates me, Kira whispered. No, Nima said. He hates hope. There's a difference. A woman appeared at Nima's side, middle-aged, sturdy, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She wore a simple gray dress and an apron, and her hands were red and work-worn. This is Trina, Nima said. She'll see to your needs. Trust her. Trina gave Kira a small, sympathetic smile. Come on, love. Let's get you inside. Kira followed her through the heavy doors and into the castle. The interior was dim and cool, lit by torches that flickered in their brackets. The walls were stone, decorated with faded tapestries that depicted battles and coronations. Servants moved silently through the halls, their eyes downcast. No one spoke to her. No one even looked at her. It reminded her of the motel. Different walls. Same invisibility. Trina led her up a winding stone staircase, their footsteps echoing. Don't mind the king, she said over her shoulder. He's not himself these days. The poison's taken more than just his health. What do you mean? Kira asked. Trina glanced back, her expression sad. He used to laugh. Used to care about things beyond duty and war. But that wound, it's been 3 years, and every day it takes a little more of who he was. She stopped at a wooden door and pushed it open. This is your room. Kira stepped inside and froze. The room was larger than any space she'd ever called her own. A bed with thick blankets. A fireplace. A window with real glass. And in the corner, a wooden tub filled with steaming water. Get yourself cleaned up, Trina said gently. I'll bring food shortly. When Trina left, Kira sank onto the bed and stared at her hands. These were supposed to save a king. She didn't believe it, but maybe she didn't have a choice. But what Kira didn't know was that Kian had already given orders. If she failed within the week, she'd be sent back to Marrow's End with enough gold to keep her quiet. He'd buried 3 healers' hopes already. What was one more? Kira didn't sleep that first night. She lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling while the fireplace crackled softly in the corner. The mattress was too soft. The blankets were too warm. The silence was too heavy. She'd spent 19 years sleeping on a thin pallet in a room she shared with stored grain sacks and broken furniture. This luxury felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. Around midnight, she gave up trying to rest. She pulled on the simple linen dress Trina had left for her, soft and clean, without a single patch or stain, and stepped into the hallway. The castle was quiet, but not silent. Somewhere in the distance, she heard footsteps. A door closing. The low murmur of voices. She didn't have a plan. She just walked, letting her bare feet carry her down one corridor, and then another, past tapestries of battles she didn't recognize and portraits of stern-faced people who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. Then she heard it. A sound like something between a groan and a growl, muffled but unmistakable. Pain. Kira stopped, her heart quickening. The sound came from behind a set of double doors at the end of the hall. Heavy. Dark wood. No guards posted outside. She should turn around. She should go back to her room and mind her own business. But her feet moved forward anyway. She pressed her ear to the door. The sound came again. Ragged breathing, a low curse, the creak of a bed frame under sudden weight. Before she could talk herself out of it, Kira pushed the door open. The room beyond was large and dimly lit by a single candle on the bedside table. The air smelled like sweat and something sour, something sick. And there, in the massive bed against the far wall, was Kian. He was alone. He'd thrown off most of his blankets and lay on his back, his chest bare, his body slick with sweat. His eyes were closed, his jaw clenched, and his hands gripped the sheets like he was trying to anchor himself against some invisible storm. Kira stepped closer, her breath catching. Black veins spiderwebbed across the left side of his torso, spreading from a puckered scar just below his ribs. They looked like cracks in stone, dark and wrong, pulsing faintly with each labored breath he took. This was the poison. This was what was killing him. Kian's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he just stared at the ceiling, his breathing harsh and uneven. Then his gaze shifted to her, and his expression went from confused to furious in the span of a heartbeat. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, scraped raw. "I heard," Kira stammered. "I thought you might need." "Get out." He tried to sit up, but the movement made him wince. His hand went to his side, pressing against the scar, and his face twisted in pain. Kira didn't move. She should have been afraid. She should have obeyed. But all she could see were those black veins spreading like rot through his skin, and all she could feel was the pull. That same pull she'd felt with the dying bird, with Nima's scar. Her gift, stirring to life. "Let me help," she said quietly. "I don't need your help." Kian's voice was a snarl, but there was something underneath it. Desperation, maybe. Or fear. "Yes, you do." Before he could stop her, Kira crossed to the bed and sat on the edge. Kian stiffened, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't push her away. "Don't," he started. Kira placed her hand on his chest, just above the scar. The reaction was immediate. Heat flooded through her palm, up her arm, into her core. She gasped as the familiar emptiness opened inside her. That feeling of something being poured out, drawn from her very essence and into him. The black veins began to recede. Not much. Not all the way. But they pulled back from his collarbone, retreating toward the wound like shadows fleeing from light. Kian's breathing steadied. The tension in his jaw eased. And then his hand shot up and grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. His eyes were wide, dark, and full of something Kira couldn't name. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered. "Healing you," Kira said, though her voice shook. She could feel her strength draining, feel the pull getting stronger, and she knew if she didn't stop soon, she'd give too much. She pulled her hand back, breaking the connection. The warmth vanished. The veins stopped retreating. But the damage was done. Or rather, the healing was begun. Kian stared at her, his chest rising and falling in steady, even breaths for the first time since she'd entered the room. He looked down at his side, at the veins that had pulled back just slightly, and then back at her. "It doesn't hurt," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. Confusion. Suspicion. For the first time in 3 years, "It doesn't hurt." Kira's vision swam. She swayed slightly, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Kian's other hand shot out to steady her, gripping her shoulder. "What did you do?" "I told you," she whispered. "I healed you. A little." "Why?" The question came out harsh, almost angry. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Kira met his eyes, and despite the exhaustion, despite the fear, she spoke the truth. "Because you were in pain, and I couldn't just walk away." Kian stared at her for a long, breathless moment. His hand was still on her shoulder, his grip firm but no longer crushing. She could feel the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. And beneath all that hardness, all that cold armor he wore, she saw something else. Loneliness. "The others tried," he said quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier venom. 3 of them. Healers my mother dragged here from every corner of the kingdom. They touched the wound. They used herbs and spells and prayers. And nothing worked. Nothing even came close. "I'm not them," Kira said. "No." Kian's thumb brushed against her shoulder, almost absent-mindedly, like he didn't realize he was doing it. "You're not." He released her and leaned back against the headboard, his gaze never leaving her face. "You should go," he said, but there was no command in it. Just weariness. Kira stood on shaking legs. She made it halfway to the door before his voice stopped her. Kira. She turned. Kian was watching her, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. Thank you, he said. It was barely a whisper, but it was enough. Kira nodded and slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. She made it back to her own room, collapsed onto the bed, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But what Kira didn't know was that Kian lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the place where she'd touched him, feeling something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. And in the shadows of the castle, someone else had been watching. Someone who wanted the king to stay broken. Would Kira's gift be enough to save him? Or had she just painted a target on her own back? Kira woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of fresh bread. She sat up slowly, her head pounding, her body heavy with exhaustion. Using her gift always left her feeling hollow, like a well that had been drawn from too deeply. But this morning, the emptiness felt deeper than usual. A tray sat on the small table near the fireplace, bread, cheese, sliced apples, and a pot of tea that was still steaming. Trina must have brought it while she slept. Kira forced herself out of bed and ate slowly, each bite an effort. The bread was soft and warm, better than anything she'd tasted at the motel, but it sat heavy in her stomach. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the teacup. She was still eating when the door opened and Trina stepped inside, carrying a bundle of folded clothes. Good, you're awake, Trina said, setting the clothes on the bed. I was starting to worry. You slept straight through until noon. Noon? Kira blinked. She'd never slept that late in her life. Nalef would have dragged her out of bed by her hair if she'd tried. You needed it. Trina's eyes softened as she looked at Kira. You look pale, love. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Kira lied. Trina didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she moved to the window and opened it wider, letting fresh air sweep through the room. The whole castle's talking about you, Trina said casually, her back still turned. Kira's stomach dropped. Talking about me? Why? Because the king slept through the night. Trina glanced over her shoulder, her expression knowing. First time in months he hasn't woken the guards with his shouting. First time he's come down to the hall for breakfast without looking like death itself. Kira's face flushed. I just. You healed him. Trina turned fully now, crossing her arms. Don't bother denying it. I saw the way he looked this morning. Steadier. Stronger. Whatever you did, it worked. Kira set down her teacup, her hands shaking harder now. It was barely anything. The veins pulled back a little, but the poison's still there. I didn't cure him. Doesn't matter, Trina said quietly. You did more in one night than 3 trained healers managed in months. That makes you dangerous. The word hung in the air like a blade. Dangerous? Kira repeated. To who? Trina moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. To the people who want him to stay sick. Kira's breath caught. Why would anyone want that? Trina sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed, her expression grave. Because a dying king is a weak king. And a weak king means someone else gets to hold the real power. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Kian united the territories 15 years ago, but not everyone was happy about it. There are lords who lost land, nobles who lost influence, families who think they deserve the throne more than he did. But he's still the king, Kira said. They can't overthrow him outright. He's too strong, even sick. His armies are too loyal. But if he dies? Trina's eyes darkened. Then the throne goes to whoever can claim it. And there are at least 4 lords in this court right now who think they have a right to sit on it. Kira felt cold all over. So they're just waiting for him to die. Waiting. Hoping. Maybe even helping it along, though I've got no proof of that. Trina reached out and took Kira's hand. Listen to me, love. If you can truly heal him, if you can bring him back from the edge, you'll make enemies. Powerful ones. People who've spent years positioning themselves for the moment he finally falls. I don't care about politics, Kira said, though her voice shook. I just want to help him. I know you do. And that's exactly why you need to be careful. Trina squeezed her hand. Don't trust anyone in this court except Nima. Not the advisors. Not the lords. Not even the guards. Some of them are loyal to Kian, yes. But others. She shook her head. Others are loyal to gold. And there's plenty of that being passed around to the right hands. Kira pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. She'd thought escaping Nalef meant escaping danger. But she was starting to realize she'd only traded one kind of trap for another. Why are you telling me this? Kira asked quietly. Trina's expression softened. Because I like you. And because I liked the king before the poison started eating him alive. He was a good man once. A fair one. And I'd like to see him get the chance to be that man again. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. But more than that, I'm telling you because you remind me of my daughter. She was about your age when she died. Fever took her 5 years back. Kira's throat tightened. I'm sorry. So am I. Trina's smile was sad. She was kind like you. Wanted to help people. Even when it cost her. I couldn't save her. But maybe. She trailed off, then shook her head. Just be careful, Kira. Please. She left before Kira could respond. Kira sat alone in the quiet room, Trina's words circling her mind like vultures. Dangerous. Enemies. People who wanted the king to die. She looked down at her hands, small, scarred, trembling. These hands had healed a bird, a scar, a king's wound. But could they protect her from the kind of danger Trina was talking about? She didn't know. And that terrified her more than anything Nalif had ever done. Because at least with Nalif, she'd known what to expect. She'd known the rules of survival. Here, in this castle of stone and shadows, the rules were different. And she was learning them too slowly. A soft knock sounded at the door. Kira's heart jumped. Come in. The door opened, and a young servant boy stepped inside, his eyes downcast. He couldn't have been more than 10. Begging your pardon, miss, he said quietly. The king requests your presence in his chambers. He says it's time you tried again. Kira's pulse quickened. Now, the boy nodded. She stood on shaking legs, smoothed down her dress, and followed him out into the corridor. As they walked, she couldn't shake Trina's warning. You'll make enemies. She was about to step back into the king's chambers. About to touch him again. About to heal him again. And somewhere in this castle, someone was watching. Someone who didn't want her to succeed. Maybe you've been in a place where helping someone puts you at risk. Maybe you stayed silent when you should have spoken. Maybe you walked away when someone needed you, because it was safer that way. We've all done it. But Kira? She's walking straight into the fire, even though she knows she might get burned. Because sometimes the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same. And maybe, just maybe, that's a reminder some of us needed today. But what Kira didn't know was that the servant boy leading her wasn't just a servant. He was a spy. And every word she'd spoken to Trina had already been reported to someone in the shadows. Would her next healing session save the king? Or would it be the moment her enemies decided she'd become too dangerous to live? The servant boy led Kira through a maze of corridors, but instead of stopping at the king's bedchamber, he brought her to a different door. Smaller, plainer, tucked away in a quieter wing of the castle. He knocked twice and left without a word. Enter, came Kian's voice from inside. Kira pushed the door open and stepped into a room she hadn't expected. It wasn't grand or imposing like she'd imagined a king's private space would be. Instead, it was simple, almost sparse. A desk cluttered with maps and reports. A single bookshelf. 2 chairs positioned near a stone fireplace where flames crackled softly. No throne. No guards. No ceremony. Just a man sitting in one of the chairs, staring into the fire. Kian looked up when she entered. He'd changed since this morning. He wore a simple black tunic instead of his armor, and his hair looked like he'd run his hands through it too many times. The shadows under his eyes were still there, but they seemed lighter somehow. Close the door, he said. Kira obeyed, her heart hammering. Sit. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat, perching on the edge like she might need to run at any moment. The fire warmed her face, but her hands were ice cold in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Kian just stared at the flames, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the armrest. Finally, he broke the silence. I didn't ask you here to heal me, he said quietly. Kira blinked. Then why? Because I owe you an apology. His eyes shifted to her, and there was something in them she hadn't seen before. Regret, maybe. Yesterday in the courtyard I was cruel. I treated you like you were nothing, and you didn't deserve that. Kira didn't know what to say. She'd expected many things from this meeting, but an apology wasn't one of them. You were angry, she said carefully. I understand. That's no excuse. Kian leaned back in his chair, his gaze returning to the fire. My mother has a way of making decisions without asking me first. She's done it my whole life. And when she brought you here, I saw it as just another attempt to fix something she doesn't understand. He paused. But last night, when you When you touched the wound, I felt something I haven't felt in 3 years. What? Kira asked softly. Peace. The word came out like a confession. Just for a moment. The pain stopped. The voices in my head stopped. And I could breathe. He looked at her then, really looked at her. So I'm sorry. For the things I said. For the way I looked at you. You didn't deserve it. Kira's throat tightened. She'd spent her whole life being spoken to like she was worthless. And now a king was apologizing to her. Thank you, she whispered. Kian nodded once, then gestured to the fire. I thought maybe we could just talk. No healing. No expectations. Just two people sitting by a fire. Kira relaxed slightly. I'd like that. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost peaceful. Can I ask you something? Kian said eventually. Of course. The scar on your wrist. He nodded toward her hand. How did you get it? Kira glanced down at the thin white line that wrapped around her left wrist like a bracelet. She'd almost forgotten it was there. I was 10, she said quietly. My stepfather, Nalif, had a bad night at the card tables. Lost more money than he had. When he came home, he was drunk and angry, and I was in his way. She touched the scar absently. He grabbed me by the wrist and dragged me across the room. My arm caught on a broken nail sticking out of the doorframe. Split the skin open. Kian's expression darkened. What did your mother do? She wrapped it. Told me to stay out of his sight for a few days. Kira's voice was flat, emotionless. She tried her best, but she was scared of him too. We both were. And after she died, it got worse. Kira looked into the fire, the flames blurring slightly. He didn't hit me often. Didn't need to. He had other ways of making me feel small. Kian was quiet for a long moment. Then he rolled up his sleeve, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his elbow to his wrist. I was 12, he said. My father took me on my first real hunt. Not for sport, for food. Winter was coming, and the stores were low. We tracked a boar for hours through the Blackwater forest. He traced the scar with his finger. When we finally cornered it, my father told me to make the kill. Prove I was ready to be king one day. What happened? I hesitated. Kian's voice was low, almost ashamed. The boar charged. I froze. My father shoved me out of the way and took the hit himself. Broke 3 ribs. The boar's tusk caught my arm as I fell. He lowered his sleeve. My father survived. But he never let me forget that I'd frozen. That I'd failed. Kira stared at him, seeing him differently now. Not as a king. Not as some untouchable figure of power. But as a boy who'd carried the weight of his father's disappointment his whole life. That's why you push people away, she said softly. Because you think if you let them close, they'll see you hesitate again. They'll see you fail. Kian's jaw tightened. Maybe. You're not 12 anymore, Kira said. And you didn't freeze last night when I tried to help you. You let me in. For a moment. He looked at her, his eyes shadowed. But moments don't last. People leave. People die. People disappoint you. It's easier to keep them at a distance. Easier, Kira agreed. But lonelier. Kian said nothing, but she saw the truth of it in his face. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. I spent 19 years being told I was worthless. That my only value was what I could do for other people. And I believed it. I still believe it most days. She paused. But you've spent your whole life being told you have to be perfect. That you can't show weakness. That the weight of the kingdom rests on your shoulders alone. And you believed it too. Kian's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something crack in that iron exterior. We're both trapped, he said quietly. Just in different cages. Yes, Kira said. But maybe we don't have to stay that way. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Tell me something true, Kian said suddenly. Something you've never told anyone. Kira hesitated. Then quietly. Sometimes when I use my gift, I'm afraid I'll give too much. That I'll pour so much of myself into someone else that there won't be anything left. And part of me wonders if that would be easier. If disappearing would hurt less than staying. Kian's expression softened in a way she hadn't thought possible. I know that feeling, he said. Some mornings, I wake up and wonder if it would be easier to just let the poison win. To stop fighting. He looked down at his hands. But then I think about my people. About my mother. About the kingdom that would fall apart if I gave up. And I get out of bed anyway. That's not a weakness, Kira said. That's strength. So is choosing to stay, Kian replied, his eyes finding hers again. Even when disappearing feels easier. They sat in silence after that, but it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of shared pain, of something fragile but real beginning to take root between them. Maybe it was too soon to call it trust. Maybe it was too broken to call it hope. But it was something. And for two people who'd spent their lives believing they had to carry their burdens alone, that was enough. You know, it's easy to walk past someone and never really see them. To look at a king and only see the crown. To look at a servant and only see the work they do. But everybody's carrying something. Everybody's got scars they hide under long sleeves and smiles they wear like armor. Maybe today, you could ask someone how they're really doing. Not just how are you, but really ask. Really listen. Because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to sit by the fire and say, "Me too." And that can change everything. But what neither of them knew was that outside the door, someone had been listening. And in the shadows of the court, a plan was already forming. If Kira could reach the king's heart, she had to be removed. Permanently. Would their fragile connection be enough to survive what was coming? Or would the enemies lurking in the castle tear them apart before they ever had the chance to heal? Chapter 7. The Return of Nalef. 3 days passed in a rhythm Kira had never known before. Each morning, she would wake to find breakfast already waiting in her room. Each afternoon, she would sit with Kian by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. And each evening, she would place her hands on his wound and pour a little more of herself into pushing back the poison. The black veins were retreating, slowly but visibly. Kian could stand longer now without wincing. He'd started taking his meals in the great hall again instead of alone in his chambers. The color was returning to his face. And something else was changing too, something neither of them spoke aloud but both could feel. The way his hand would linger on hers after a healing session. The way she'd catch him watching her across the room with an expression she couldn't quite name. The way the silence between them had shifted from awkward to intimate. Trina noticed. She'd smile knowingly whenever she brought Kira fresh clothes or tea, but she never said anything. Nima noticed too, and the satisfaction in her eyes was unmistakable. But on the fourth morning, everything changed. Kira was in the castle garden, a small courtyard tucked between the east and west wings where herbs grew in neat rows. Trina had asked her to pick mint for tea, and Kira had been grateful for the excuse to be outside in the fresh air. She was kneeling by the mint plants, her fingers brushing against the fragrant leaves, when she heard voices at the main gate. Loud, demanding, familiar. Her blood turned to ice. She stood slowly and moved toward the garden wall, peering through the iron gate that separated the garden from the main courtyard. 2 men stood at the palace entrance, arguing with the guards. One was thick-necked and red-faced, gesturing wildly. The other was thinner, older, with a calculating gleam in his eyes. Gofa and Nalef. Kira's heart slammed against her ribs. No, they couldn't be here. They shouldn't be here. We're merchants from the southern territories, Nalef was saying, his voice dripping with false respect. We've brought goods for trade, spices, silks, things the court might find valuable. Surely the king would want to see what we have to offer. The king doesn't receive merchants without appointment, the guard said flatly. Come back next month when the trade fair opens. Next month, Gofa's voice rose. We've traveled for days. Our goods are perishable. Surely there's someone we can speak to. An advisor, perhaps? Someone with authority. The guard hesitated, and Kira saw the moment his resolve wavered. Wait here. I'll see if the steward has time. He disappeared inside, leaving Nalef and Gofa standing in the courtyard. Kira's mind raced. She should run. She should find Nima or Kian and warn them. But her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen, watching through the gate like a rabbit spotting a wolf. Nalef glanced around the courtyard, his eyes scanning the windows, the walls, the gates. Then his gaze landed on the garden. On her. His eyes widened. Then his lips curled into a smile that made her stomach turn. He nudged Gofa and whispered something. Gofa looked toward the garden, saw her, and grinned. Kira stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. She turned and ran. She burst through the garden door and into the castle, her bare feet slapping against the stone floors. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away, had to find someone, had to. She collided with someone and nearly fell. Strong hands caught her shoulders. She looked up and found herself staring into Kian's face. Kira, his brow furrowed. What's wrong? He's here, she gasped. Nalif. My stepfather. He's here. At the gate. Kian's expression darkened instantly. What? He and Gofa. They're pretending to be merchants, but they saw me and… Her words tumbled over each other. I don't know what they want, but it can't be good. Nima paid him. He signed papers. He's not supposed to. Breathe, Kian said firmly, his hands still on her shoulders. Slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. Kira forced herself to take a breath and explained what she'd seen and heard. By the time she finished, Kian's jaw was set like stone. Stay here, he said. No, Kira. His voice softened slightly. Trust me. Stay here. He turned and strode toward the main entrance, his presence commanding enough that servants and guards alike moved out of his way. Kira followed anyway, keeping to the shadows. By the time she reached the entrance hall, Kian was already descending the main steps into the courtyard. Nalif and Gofa straightened when they saw him, their expressions shifting to practiced deference. Your Majesty, Nalif said, bowing low. What an honor. We are humble merchants seeking to. I know exactly what you are, Kian said coldly. You're the man who sold a girl to my mother for 300 gold pieces. And you're the man she warned never to come near this place again. Nalif's smile faltered. Your Majesty, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're simply here to… To what? Kian descended the last step and stood directly in front of them. Even without armor, he was intimidating, tall, broad, radiating controlled fury. To trade, or to sniff around for information you can sell to my enemies. Gofa shifted uncomfortably. We don't know what you're talking about, Your Majesty. We're honest traders, nothing more. Honest. Kian's laugh was harsh. You tried to buy a knight with a 19-year-old girl for 50 gold pieces. That's your definition of honest. Nalif's face reddened. That was a private business arrangement that ended the moment my mother paid you. Kian stepped closer, and both men instinctively stepped back. You signed a contract. You relinquished all claims. So I'll ask you once, what are you really doing here? Nalif's mask slipped. His eyes hardened. Fine. You want the truth. That girl belongs to me. I raised her, fed her, kept a roof over her head after her worthless mother died. And your mother swooped in and stole her with money that should have been. Should have been what? Kian's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Yours. You think you have a right to her. I think I have a right to compensation for my loss, Nalif shot back. That girl has a gift. A valuable one. And I deserve. You deserve nothing. The voice came from behind Kian. Nima emerged from the castle, her face calm but her eyes blazing. You deserve less than nothing, she continued, descending the steps with regal grace. But I paid you anyway. Paid you triple what you asked. And still, you come crawling back like the parasite you are. Nalif's face twisted. She's valuable. More valuable than you know. There are people in this court who would pay handsomely for information about her. About what she can do. About where she came from. The courtyard went silent. Kira's blood ran cold. He was threatening to expose her. To sell her secrets to whoever would pay. Kian's hand went to the hilt of his sword. Are you threatening her? I'm stating facts, Nalif said, trying to sound confident but failing. The girl is worth more than 300 gold. And if you're not willing to pay what she's worth, I know others who will. Kian drew his sword in one smooth motion. The sound of steel rang through the courtyard. Let me state a fact, he said quietly. If you ever speak her name again, if you ever set foot within 100 miles of this palace, if you ever even think about her, I will hunt you down personally. And what I do to you will make you wish you'd never been born. Nalif went pale. Gofa was already backing toward the gate. The contract you signed wasn't just a transaction, Nima added. It was a severing. She is no longer yours in any capacity. And if you think you can sell information about her, she smiled coldly. Try. See what happens when the king's enemies learn you're the one spreading rumors. See how long you survive. Nalif opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Gofa, who was already halfway through the gate. This isn't over, Nalif spat. Yes, Kian said. It is. He nodded to the guards. Escort them out. If they're not beyond the forest by nightfall, arrest them. The guards moved forward. Nalif and Gofa had no choice but to retreat, their faces twisted with fury and humiliation. Kira watched from the shadows as they disappeared through the gate. She should have felt relieved, but all she felt was dread, because Nalif never made empty threats, and she knew deep in her bones that he would find a way to make good on his promise. Maybe you've had someone from your past show up when you thought you were finally free. Maybe you felt that old fear crawl back into your chest, reminding you that some chains are harder to break than others. It's easy to tell someone to just move on, but trauma doesn't work that way. Healing isn't a straight line. And sometimes the people who hurt us don't just disappear because we want them to. If that's you today, I hope you know, you're not weak for still being afraid. You're strong for still standing. But what Kira didn't know was that Nalef had already made contact with someone inside the castle. Someone who wanted the king to fail. And the information he'd sold had just set a deadly plan in motion. Would Kian's protection be enough? Or had Nalef's greed just signed Kira's death warrant? The attack came at midnight. Kira woke to the sound of shouting and the clash of steel against steel. She bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering, her mind still foggy with sleep. Footsteps pounded past her door. More shouting. A scream cut short. She threw off her blankets and ran to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. The voices were distant but urgent, guards calling for reinforcements, someone yelling about the king's chambers. The king's chambers. Kian. Kira didn't think. She yanked open the door and ran barefoot down the corridor, her nightgown billowing behind her. Servants huddled in doorways, their faces pale with fear. Guards rushed past her toward the west wing. She followed them. By the time she reached Kian's chambers, a crowd had already gathered. Guards with drawn swords, advisors in nightclothes, and Nima, her face carved from stone as she stood in the doorway. "Let me through," Kira gasped, pushing her way forward. One of the guards tried to block her. "Miss, you shouldn't." "Let her through," Nima said sharply. The guard stepped aside. Kira stumbled into the room and froze. Kian lay on the floor beside his bed, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. His hand pressed against his side, the same side where the old wound festered. But this time, there was a new gash, deep and vicious, cutting across the poisoned scar. Trina knelt beside him, pressing cloths against the wound, but they were already soaked through. "What happened?" Kira's voice came out strangled. "Assassin," one of the guards said grimly. He gestured to a crumpled figure near the window, a man in dark clothes, a blade still clutched in his dead hand. He came through the window. Poison blade, same as before. The king killed him, but not before. "Not before he struck," Nima finished, her voice tight. Kira dropped to her knees beside Kian. His eyes were half closed, his face gray. The black veins that had been retreating over the past few days were spreading again, faster now, racing across his chest and up his neck like cracks in breaking ice. "Kian," she whispered, taking his hand. It was cold. Too cold. His eyes flickered open, unfocused. "Kira, I'm here. You need to go." His voice was barely audible. "Not safe. They'll come for you next. I'm not leaving you." "Stubborn," he murmured, and his lips twitched in something that might have been a smile. "Always stubborn." Trina looked up at Kira, her eyes red. The poison's moving too fast this time. The new wound opened the old one. "It's in his blood now, spreading to his heart." Her voice broke. "I don't think he has more than an hour." "No." Kira's hands trembled as she pressed them against his chest. "No. I can heal him. I've done it before, I can." "Kira." Nima's hand landed on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "This isn't like before. This isn't just pushing back the poison. This is..." She trailed off, but Kira understood. This was death. Real and immediate. Kira looked down at Kian. His breathing was getting weaker. The black veins had reached his jaw. She'd healed him before in small doses, carefully measured, giving just enough of herself to help without draining completely. But this would require everything. This would mean pouring her entire life force into him, holding nothing back. And there was no guarantee she'd survive it. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a memory from childhood. "The gift takes as much as it gives, Kira. Never forget that. If you give too much, there won't be anything left." She looked at her hands, glowing faintly already in response to his pain. She could feel the pull, stronger than it had ever been, like a river trying to drag her under. If she did this, she might die. But if she didn't, he would. "Everybody out," Kira said quietly. "What?" Trina blinked. "Out. Now." Kira's voice was steel. "All of you. I need silence." Nima studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "You heard her. Everyone out." The guards hesitated, but Nima's glare sent them moving. Trina squeezed Kira's shoulder once before leaving. Within moments, The room was empty except for Kira and Kian. Kira positioned herself beside him, placing both hands flat against his chest, directly over the wound. Kira, don't. Kian's hand weakly grasped her wrist. Not worth it. Yes, you are, she whispered. You'll die. Maybe. She met his eyes, and hers were filled with tears. But maybe I won't. And either way, I'm not watching you slip away when I can do something about it. Why? The word came out broken. Why would you risk everything for me? Kira's throat tightened. She'd known the answer for days now, maybe longer, but she'd been too afraid to say it aloud. Not anymore. Because I love you, she said simply. And love isn't about what's safe or smart or fair. It's about choosing someone, even when it costs you everything. Kian's eyes widened, and for a moment, the pain seemed to fade from his face. Kira. Shh. She pressed her forehead against his. Let me do this. Please. She didn't wait for an answer. She closed her eyes and let go. The warmth flooded out of her like a dam breaking. It poured from her hands into his chest, golden and blazing, filling the room with light. She felt it pulling from her core, from her bones, from the very essence of who she was. The black veins began to retreat, faster this time, fleeing from the light like shadows at dawn. The new wound started to close, flesh knitting together, blood flow slowing. But the cost was immediate. Kira's vision blurred. Her strength drained away like water through a sieve. She could feel herself disappearing, piece by piece, everything that made her flowing into him. Too much, a voice whispered in her mind. You're giving too much. But she didn't stop. She thought about the boy who'd frozen on a hunt and carried that shame his whole life. The king who'd forgotten how to let people close. The man who'd sat with her by the fire and shared his scars. She thought about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The way his hand lingered on hers. The way he'd drawn his sword to defend her against Nalif without a moment's hesitation. She loved him. And that was enough. The light grew brighter, blinding, filling every corner of the room. Then suddenly it stopped. Kira collapsed forward onto Kian's chest, her hands still glowing faintly, her body completely spent. Below her, Kian gasped, a deep, shuddering breath that sounded like a man breaking the surface of water after nearly drowning. The black veins were gone. Completely. The wound was closed. His skin, though pale, was no longer gray. He was alive. But Kira wasn't moving. Kira. Kian's voice was stronger now, panicked. He tried to sit up, cradling her against him. Kira, open your eyes. Please. She didn't respond. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely feel it. Her skin was ice cold. No. No, no, no. He pulled her closer, his hands shaking. You don't get to do this. You don't get to save me, and then leave. Kira. Kira. The door burst open. Nima rushed in, Trina right behind her. Is he? Nima stopped, her eyes going wide as she took in the scene. Kian, fully healed, holding Kira's limp body in his arms. She won't wake up, Kian said, his voice breaking. She saved me, but she won't wake up. Nima knelt beside them, pressing her fingers against Kira's neck. Her pulse is there. Faint, but there. Then why? She gave too much, Nima said quietly. She poured her life into yours. Now hers is barely there. Kian's face crumpled. No, I won't accept that. There has to be something. There is, Nima said, gripping his arm. You. He stared at her. What? She gave you her life. Now you give some of it back. Nima's eyes were fierce. You're connected now. Heart to heart. If you will, if you choose it, you can anchor her. Pull her back. Kian didn't hesitate. He placed his hand over Kira's heart, closed his eyes, and willed every ounce of strength he had into her. Come back, he thought fiercely. I'm not letting you go. Come back to me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kira gasped. Her eyes flew open, and she sucked in a desperate breath like someone pulled from deep water. Kian, she whispered. He laughed, a sound caught between relief and tears. I'm here. You're okay. You're okay. She touched his face weakly. You're healed. Because of you. I thought. Her voice wavered. I thought I might not come back. I wouldn't let you go. His hand covered hers. Not after you just told me you love me. Despite everything, Kira smiled. You heard that. Every word. Maybe you've been holding back from someone. Maybe you've been too scared to say, I love you, or I need you, or I'm not okay. Maybe you've been protecting yourself so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be vulnerable. But here's the thing. Real love requires risk. It requires giving pieces of yourself even when you're terrified. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in. But what neither of them knew was that the assassin hadn't acted alone. Outside the castle walls, Nalef stood watching the window, his face twisted in rage. He'd sent the killer. And when he learned Kira had survived, that she'd saved the king, he would come for her himself. Because men like Nalef don't forgive. They just find new ways to destroy what they can't control. Would Kian and Kira's love be strong enough to survive what came next? Or was the real battle only just beginning? Kira woke 3 days later to sunlight streaming through tall windows and the unfamiliar softness of silk sheets. She blinked slowly, her body heavy and unresponsive, like she'd been asleep for years instead of days. The room was quiet except for the gentle crackling of a fire and the sound of someone breathing nearby. She turned her head and found Kian sitting in a chair beside the bed, his head tilted back, eyes closed. He'd pulled the chair so close that his hand rested on the bed near hers, as if even in sleep he needed to know she was still there. He looked different. The shadows under his eyes were lighter. His face had color again. The tension that had carved lines into his features was gone, replaced by something softer. He looked peaceful. "You're staring," he said without opening his eyes. Kira's heart jumped. "You're awake." "I've been awake for 3 days." He opened his eyes and looked at her, and the relief in his gaze made her throat tighten. "You're the one who's been sleeping." 3 days. She tried to sit up, but her arms trembled with the effort. Kian was beside her instantly, his hands gentle as he helped her up and propped pillows behind her back. "Easy. You nearly died, remember?" "I remember saving you," she said softly. "You did more than that." He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers. "You gave me my life back. All of it. The poison's gone, Kira. Completely. The physicians can't explain it, but I can feel it. I'm whole again." Kira looked down at their joined hands. He was warm, strong, and alive. "I'm glad." "Are you?" His voice was quiet. "Even though it almost killed you?" She met his eyes. "Yes." Kian studied her face for a long moment, then lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, right over his heart. "Feel that?" She felt it, the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "That beats because of you," he said. "And from this moment forward, it beats for you." Before Kira could respond, the door opened and Nima swept in, Trina close behind her carrying a tray of food. "Finally," Nima said, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep forever." "How dramatic," Kira said weakly, managing a small smile. Nima sat on the other side of the bed and took Kira's free hand. "You gave us quite a scare, child." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Nima's grip tightened. "You saved my son. You saved the kingdom. You have nothing to apologize for." Trina set the tray down and poured tea with shaking hands. "You need to eat, love. Build your strength back." Kira ate slowly, her body grateful for the nourishment even as her mind spun with questions. "What happened after? After you collapsed?" Kian's jaw tightened. "We questioned the assassin's body. Found a letter in his coat. Instructions. Payment details." He paused. "It was Nalef. He hired the killer. Paid him with the gold my mother gave him." Kira's blood went cold. "He tried to have you killed." "He tried to have me killed so he could claim you in the chaos that followed," Kian corrected, his voice hard as stone. "The letter was clear. If I died, he planned to present himself as your guardian and remove you from the palace before anyone could stop him." "Where is he now?" Kira asked quietly. "The salt mines," Nima said with satisfaction. "On the eastern border. Hard labor for the rest of his miserable life. Go for 2. "They'll die there," Trina added, not unkindly. "Most men don't last more than a few years in the mines." Kira should have felt something, guilt maybe, or pity. But all she felt was relief. Nalef couldn't hurt her anymore. Couldn't hurt anyone anymore. "Good," she whispered. Kian squeezed her hand. "You're safe now. I promise you that." Over the next week, Kira's strength returned slowly. She took short walks through the castle gardens, Kian always at her side. She sat with Nima and Trina by the fire, listening to stories about Kian as a boy. She watched from the balcony as the kingdom went about its business below, no longer dying but thriving under a king who'd been given a second chance. And every night, Kian would come to her room, sit beside her bed, and talk until she fell asleep. On the 8th day, he asked her to walk with him. He led her through the castle and up a winding staircase to a balcony she'd never seen before. It overlooked the entire kingdom. The Blackwater Forest stretching to the south, the mountains rising to the north, the river cutting through the valley like a silver ribbon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "I need to tell you something," Kian said, turning to face her. Kira's heart quickened. "What is it?" "The council has been persistent. They want me to take a queen. Say the kingdom needs stability, an heir, all the political reasons." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I told them I already have someone in mind." "You do?" Kira's voice came out small. "Yes." He took both her hands in his. "A girl who ran into the wrong room and saved my mother from despair. A girl who looked at a dying king and chose to fight for him anyway. A girl who gave everything to heal a man who'd been cruel to her." His voice softened. "A girl who taught me that strength isn't about carrying everything alone. It's about letting someone else help carry the weight." Tears welled in Kira's eyes. "Kian, I'm not asking you to be my queen because I need one," he said. "I'm asking because I love you. Because I want to spend every day of the life you gave back to me at your side. Because you've already healed the part of me that was broken long before the poison ever touched my skin." Kira's tears spilled over. "I'm nobody. I'm just a girl from a failing motel who—" "You're everything," Kian interrupted gently. "And if you'll have me, I want the whole kingdom to know it." She looked at him. This king who'd been cold and broken and lost, now standing before her whole and warm and found. She thought about the girl she'd been just weeks ago, the one who believed she was worthless, who thought her only value was what she could do for others. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who'd chosen love over fear, someone who'd risked everything and gained everything in return. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Kian pulled her into his arms and kissed her as the sun set over the kingdom they would rule together. Below them, the castle bells began to ring, announcing the news to the people. The Alpha King had found his queen, and two souls, once broken and alone, had finally found their way home. Kian pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "There's one more thing." Kira raised an eyebrow. "More than asking me to be your queen?" A slight smile played on his lips. "Nalif and Gofa. They're being transported to the salt mines tomorrow at dawn. I thought you might want to be there. To see it. To know it's real." Kira was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "No. I don't need to see him again. Not ever." She squeezed his hand. "He doesn't deserve any more of my time. Not even for closure." Kian's smile widened, genuine and warm. "That's my queen." As the last rays of sunlight faded and the first stars appeared above the kingdom, Kira leaned against Kian's chest and listened to the heartbeat she'd saved. She was no longer the girl who hid her gift in fear. She was no longer the girl who believed she was worthless. She was Kira, healer, survivor, queen, and for the first time in her life, she was home. The end.